the Lord of Lies. Come, be crushed like the insects you are. The only is what
So today I want to go over an endgame Druid build I created that completely surprised me in how strong it actually came out. Because this is a Earthen Cataclysm Druid build that will allow you to do pretty much all endgame content. You can do everything in Torment 12. In fact, unless you're in like higher tier pits, pretty much everything in Torment 12 is quite easy. You can go do all of the layer bosses on Torment 12. You can go farm any content you want to do, and you can even do like 120 plus pit runs. I'm sure if you min-max this build, you could probably get like 130, maybe even a little bit higher than that pit runs, but you can do Torment 12 and like 120 pit runs pretty easily without fully min-maxing this build. Now there's two things we have to go over with how this build actually works and scales its damage, because it is completely focused around almost all of your damage coming from Cataclysm. Now the first place we're scaling all of our damage is through Might of the Urzine, because even though Cataclysm isn't a Werebear build, what you can do is pop Cataclysm and just instantly go into Werebear after that, and you will get all of your normal Werebear bonuses. So with Might of the Urzine, we gain a pretty big damage boost per stack of resolve we have, and then you gain 1 stack of resolve per second. Now with this build and with all of the rolls and stats and everything we have 58 stacks of resolve total. So it's 58 times 13, and that's a multiplicative damage increase, so that's over 700% increased damage. And you just pop Cataclysm, then go into Werebear, and you'll get all of that damage boost on our Cataclysm. That's the first massive way in which we scale our damage. The second way is through our max resource, or specifically max spirit. And the massive damage increase we're getting for this is through your Paragon Boards through the Ancestral Guidance legendary node. This says after spending 75 spirit, you deal increased damage for 5 seconds, but the secondary part is the important part. Your ultimate skills deal 1% increased damage per spirit when cast. That's a multiplicative scalar, and currently right now I have 800 spirit. So it's an 800% multiplicative damage increase just for our ultimate skill. So just for Cataclysm. Now you need that spirit when you cast Cataclysm, but we're not spending much spirit outside of Cataclysm, so you should have it pretty easy, and we can gain spirit very quickly. And also a main way in which we get so much max spirit is through the Melted Heart of Selig, the mythic necklace. And this reads that damage is dealt to your primary resource before life, and damage taken this way is drastically reduced. So essentially we have massively reduced max life, but before killing us, it'll use all of our spirit as essentially a second life bar. And the second part of this is your primary resource is doubled, but your max life is reduced by up to 75%. Now the important part is your primary resource is doubled. So without this, we'd have 400 spirit. With it, we have 800. So just using this necklace gives us more damage for our ultimate than I think like even a best in slot rolled necklace could. And on top of that, you are actually pretty tanky because we have so much spirit, and because that damage that would be dealt to your spirit is massively reduced, and because of some other elements of this build that just give us ridiculous defensives like 20 million toughness. Ridiculous. But that brings us to our talisman, and I am using the mythic talisman that reduces the number of items we need to get the set bonuses. And with this mythic seal, that means we get to have the 5 set of the Old Mountain set and the 3 set of the Den Mother set. Now, if you do not have the mythic seal to allow for this, what you're going to do is you're going to have 5 pieces of the Old Mountain set, and then you are just going to have some unique charm that massively buffs yourself up. The Erudite Dirge is a pretty good one that just gives you increased storm damage, and it doubles when you're hitting vulnerable enemies, so that's like a 70% damage increase pretty much at all times. You can also use something really good like the God Slayer Crown, which when you try to incapacitate enemies, it pulls them to you, makes you deal more damage to them. And because of how this build works, and specifically when we get into the Old Mountain set, it'll just spam pull everything to you, which can help in a bunch of different ways. But when you have the mythic seal, you can have these 2 set bonuses, which are pretty good. And the main set we're using is Old Mountain. Your earth skills fossilize enemies, reducing their movement speed and increasing the damage they take from your earth skills bonus by 15%, stacking up to 4 times. And when they get that 4th stack, they become petrified, and petrified enemies are stunned and take bonus critical strike damage from you. The 3 sets, when you fossilize an enemy, you gain damage reduction for 15 seconds, so you're just tankier. The 5 sets where it gets really crazy. Petrified enemies, which is when you essentially hit them with 4 earth skills, you petrify them, and then petrified enemies absorb your damage dealt and then explode for 200% of the damage dealt when they were petrified. So essentially, you hit enemies with earth skills, you will be dealing more damage to those enemies hit by your earth skills because you'll be building up these fossilized stacks. At 4 stacks, you petrify them, which stuns them, which makes them take even more damage. And with the 5 set, when they are petrified for that 3 seconds, all of the damage you're dealing to them is being soaked into them. And then at the end of that 3 seconds, they explode for 200% of that damage. Now, besides this just scaling your damage even on single target even more, if you can group things up, they will explode and deal that damage in a small AoE. So as you'll see in some of the footage, you can group things up and they will just all blow up and instantly kill whole groups, even in like higher tier pit runs. So very good skill, crazy amounts of CC, crazy amounts of damage, very, very good. And then the 2 set I'm using, which gives us the 3 set bonus, is Den Mother. So dealing or taking damage in Werebear, you just gain these stacks that give you increased damage that stacks up 40 times. So you'll have an 80% damage increase. I'm not sure if this is multiplicative. I think this might actually be additive because it doesn't say in the tooltip, but then if you go compare it to most of the other sets, usually the sets with things like this are multiplicative. I'm just not exactly sure on that, but it's just a big damage increase. This will be up 100% of the time because we don't have the 5 set, which normally uses it. And then the 3 set, you gain damage reduction and even more in berserking. You also stack up the 2-piece set when you're berserking even more quickly. That doesn't really matter because you're basically always at 40 stacks, but we do gain the additional damage reduction because we're always berserking in this build. Then that brings us into our skill tree, and the first skill we're going to be having is Stone Burst. And the main reason we're using this is because we can get massively increased armor while it's active, and this is based upon how many stacks of resolve we have. So it's 20% and then 5 additional for each stack of resolve. So this is just absurd armor increases, which is just more damage reduction. The top node, we take spear cost reduction, so it's cheaper. We make it a Werebear skill, so this is how you get in Werebear anytime you want. Like I mentioned, you cast Cataclysm, then you cast this to go into Werebear to gain the massive damage increases. And then for the variant, you're taking Living Stones, which instead of being a channeled skill, you now just place this skill anywhere and it builds up over 3 seconds by itself and then blows up after the 3 seconds. You can only have 1 out at a time, but we're primarily taking this for the armor increase. Now, because of a pretty big change with the most recent patch that allows us to be absurdly tanky now, I have put more points into this because even though this isn't main damage or anywhere close to our Cataclysm damage, just getting more damage from this can be nice. And because it's an earth skill and it builds up into a big AoE, it can apply a bunch of our effects through our set bonus, so it can help us stun enemies more quickly and get them petrified more quickly, which can make us deal even more damage to them. So that's why I put more points into it, and because we don't really need the tankiness from defensives as much anymore. We're using 3 defensive skills. We're using Earthen Bulwark. This is procced through our rune set, but we do want this leveled up because we still get all of the bonuses. So the top upgrade is it lasts for 12 seconds, which does affect its duration from the rune proc, and its base absorption is up to 60% of your max life. So basically, anytime this procs through a rune set, which will be constantly, it gives us our full health as an additional barrier. Then the variant we're taking is Traventine Bulwark. It gives us 3 stacks of resolve every time it procs, and it does these tectonic spikes that deal damage to just enemies around us. And I'm just taking this for additional damage, essentially, because even though these tectonic plates aren't like crazy damage, we do just have so much general damage increases that the damage over time of this can actually help. Like if we were against, say, one boss in like a 120 pit run where you're going to be facing that boss for a little bit, the extra damage from this can start to add up over time. And it's an earth skill, so again, it applies a bunch of the different effects through our set bonus. And then we are taking Cyclone Armor, and this is going to be on our bar to get the bonus to all resistances on it, but we are using it because of the reversal variant where you use this, it pulls everything to us, which as we just went over, helps very much with our set bonus. So we pull everything together, they all explode after being petrified and all hit each other for pretty much double the damage that we're taking during that time, which can just instantly kill full groups of enemies. The top upgrade, we increase its radius, so we pull things in from further away. The bottom upgrade is resistance to gain even more all resistances to make it more tanky. Then we're taking Debilitating Roar, just a damage reduction to all enemies around us. The variant we're taking is all the effects and duration are increased by 50%, so we can get more survivability, make enemies deal less damage, and increase the duration. The side upgrade we're taking is increased duration, increase its duration, and even more while fortified. The other upgrade is max life increase, so you just want to have this up 100% of the time for just massive defensive increases. And then we are actually taking two companion skills that are both going to be on our bar. First is Poison Creeper. This is primarily for Fortify. You gain 10% Fortify every 3 seconds. This is for a massive damage boost through one of our legendary aspects, and Fortify is just nice. If you ever end up actually taking health damage, it'll heal you up quickly. Then we just took top upgrade, increases the poison duration, and we're taking Toxic Vegetation, so it's an R around us to just poison everything. It's just a little bit of extra damage and slows things. And while we are pressing all of the abilities on our bar, this really isn't for damage, even though the damage can deal a little bit over time. Now the other skill we're taking is Ravens, and the variant we're taking is just to turn it into Storm Ravens. This is to help proc one of our legendary aspects. And another reason we are taking both Ravens and Poison Creeper is our rune set is we're taking the rune that generates for us when we have companions, and it generates every 5 seconds. So every 5 seconds we will get another Earthen Bulwark because we have enough companions to do it every 5 seconds. So there's multiple different reasons we're taking these, and it's basically just to proc everything. The top upgrade is just increases its active damage. I just took this. There's not really a reason to take this. You could take this off and put it into another skill, but at this point it really doesn't matter that much. The bottom one is to gain 2 passive Ravens. That's actually important, so we have enough companions so we get a new Earthen Bulwark every 5 seconds through our runes. Then we're going all the way down, taking our main damaging ability, Cataclysm. Top upgrade, increase its duration. Bottom upgrade, we gain 4 stacks of Ferocity just for increased attack speed. And this really doesn't matter that much, but we do have some things that can increase off attack speed. It's just another point because we really don't have much to put our points into. We're making this a werewolf skill. This is actually for a specific reason, so make sure to do that. And then the upgrade we're taking is Tectonic Spikes. Cataclysm is now also an earth skill, and keep in mind it says also, so it is a storm skill that deals lightning damage, but it's also an earth skill, but it still deals lightning damage. This just adds a ton of additional scalars for us, and it summons this tectonic plate that constantly deals damage to enemies, and this actually does quite a lot of damage because it just constantly spawns below enemies, and the base scaling of this is pretty good. Then we have our Paragon Boards. The first glyph is going to be Headhunter, a bonus to normal nodes within range. Secondary is increased damage to elites. Legendary is increased damage. The first board we're taking is Lust for Carnage. Critical strikes with werewolf skills restore 2 spirit and deal increased damage. Now this just requires the skill has a werewolf tag, and our Cataclysm has the werewolf tag. So our Cataclysm will now restore spirit, deal massively increased damage. But keep in mind, you are still going right into Werebear after you cast Cataclysm. This just requires it has the tag. The glyph we're taking is Keeper, bonus to rare nodes within range. You deal increased non-physical damage, and the legendary is increased non-physical damage. Going over to the left, we're taking Earthen Devastation. Earth skills deal increased critical strike damage, and because of our variant on Cataclysm, it's now also an earth skill, so it gets a bonus from this. The glyph we're taking is Dominate, a bonus to all rare nodes within range. Secondary is increased damage while you have overpower, which our Earthen Bulwark gives us overpower, and then the legendary is increased damage. Going all the way over to the right, taking Ancestral Guidance, which we already went over. The glyph is Spirit, increased critical strike damage. Secondary, when you crit enemies, it take increased damage from you stacking up. The legendary is increased critical strike damage. Then we're going back to the middle. Up, we're taking Thundershock. Storm skills do increased damage, have increased critical strike chance, and because Cataclysm is still a storm skill, it gets these bonuses. Then the glyph we're taking is Electrocution. It gives you massive increase of lightning bolts damage, which your Cataclysm does lightning bolts, and then enemies damaged by lightning bolts take increased damage from you, which is the big reason we're taking this. The legendary is increased lightning damage. And then for Spirit Boons, we're taking Gift of the Stag. This is because it gives us 30 max spirit. And keep in mind, because of our Melted Heart of Selig, you double all of the spirit you get from anything. So this is 60. And because of our legendary node on our Paragon Boards, that is a 60% multiplicative damage increase for Cataclysm. We're taking Iron Feather for increased max life, Avian Wraith for increased critical strike damage. We're taking Calamity to extend our Cataclysm duration. And then we're taking Obsidian Slam. Casting an Earth skill gives us Resolve, helps us stack it up more quickly. Resolving. And if you lose or gain a stack of Resolve, we gain increased Earth damage for 4 seconds. And again, Cataclysm is also an Earth skill, so that'll give us some pretty big damage increases when that happens. And then for our Mercenaries, you can use whatever you want. If you need Rahir for more survivability, you could take that. I'm just taking Subo for the tracking now because don't really need the tankiness anymore. And then Oldkin for Fields of Language to slow and make enemies deal less damage because we don't really have another super great option. And then that brings us into our gear, and let's start with our gems. In your weapons, you want Topaz for lightning damage multi. In one of your armor pieces, you want increase to willpower. In your jewelry, I've just been going resist to all. I think that's generally the best, helps cover all bases. And then for our rune sets, you want to maintain at least one active companion for 5 seconds. This gains more offering for how many companions you have, and this will give us our Earthen Bulwark. And remember, Earthen Bulwark has a 12-second duration because of our upgrades, and will just give us a barrier for 100% of our max life. So every 5 seconds, we get a new barrier, and this will proc a bunch of stuff like giving us overpower and just make us super tanky. The second set is going to be cast 5 skills, then become exhausted for 3 seconds. This will give us +1 skills for 10 seconds. This can go up to 3. So anytime this is up, it will give us +3 skills. The reason we're taking this is because plus skills to Cataclysm is somewhat rare to get. So this is actually a pretty big damage increase for our Cataclysm. And then that brings us into our uniques and our mythics. For our helmet, we're using Arrow Perdition, just a massive multiplicative damage increase. Then the critical strike chance is also quite nice. Then for our necklace, we already went over this. Another thing to note with this is that it has a percentage to all stats, which is pretty nice. Just gives you a lot of stat increases. And then as the legendary aspect roll on this, your storm skill damage makes enemies vulnerable for 4 seconds. This will apply vulnerable at all times. And then we deal increased vulnerable damage. You always want this as your transfigured legendary affix roll on your necklace. Then for our 2 normal uniques, we're using Might of the Urzine, which we already went over, massive damage increase on our resolve. Then we're using Flicker Step. You evade through enemies. It reduces your ultimate's cooldown by 4 seconds up to 10 seconds total. This is how you stay in your ultimate. You're constantly spam evading through enemies to reduce the cooldown of our ultimate so we can have it up at all times. Then for our legendary aspects, we are using 2 one-handed weapons, so we just have 4 offensive aspects you can put anywhere. We have While Fortified, deal increased damage. We'll always have Fortify from our Poison Creeper. Then we have Casting an Ultimate, gives you increased damage for 8 seconds, and you gain 2 additional ultimate ranks. So just some pretty big damage increases. I've been trying to do some testing to see if some other increases would be better, but it's kind of hard to test how good increased skill ranks to ultimates actually are. Then we have your max spirit is increased by 50. Casting a skill with a cooldown increases spirit gen by up to 35 or 8 seconds. Now this has to be on a ring, so this is the one area where you have to put one of your aspects somewhere specific. And remember, because we have Melted Heart of Selig, this 50 spirit is 100 instead. That means it's a 100% multiplicative scalar for our ultimate. Pretty massive. And this is a massive spirit gen because we have a bunch of skills with cooldowns. So we'll just constantly have up to 35 spirit gen per second for 8 seconds. So this will be up almost all the time, which is pretty crazy. Final offensive aspect, casting a storm skill grants your earth skills massively increased critical strike damage. Casting an earth skill gives your storm skills 20% crit. Now, when we have these buffs up, they will both work on Cataclysm because it's a storm and earth skill. So you'll get the massive damage increase and the crit chance increase. And this is also why we took Ravens and gave them the storm variant. So essentially what you're doing is you can use both your Cyclone armor and your Ravens to proc the earth portion of this because those are storm skills. You can also do Cataclysm, but that one's a bit different. It does proc it for 4 seconds, but you're obviously not using that as frequently. And then to cast an earth skill, you gain 20% increased crit chance for storm skills. So you just cast your stone burst every 3 seconds, and you're doing that anyway because that's how long it takes to grow and explode. So every 3 seconds, you're using your stone burst anyway, which will give you the 20% crit chance increase. 20% crit chance on our Cataclysm means we don't need 20% crit through our gear. Gives us much easier ways to gear and massive earth damage increase. This skill with Cataclysm being a storm and an earth skill is actually pretty crazy now. Then for our defensive legendary aspects, on either your legs or your chest piece, you want while above 50 max resource, gain increased damage, and you gain berserking, but you lose 3 resource gen. And as we just went over, we have so much resource and we gain 35 per second that this downside is nothing. So we just gain a multiplicative damage increase and always have berserking. Berserking is another multiplicative damage increase and movement speed increase. And this is a really big change with this build. Your max resolve is increased by 2, so more multiplicative damage increase, and you gain 4% damage reduction per resolve stack. And yes, this works now. So now we have 58 stacks of resolve total. We gain 4% DR per resolve stack. We can legitimately have like 20 million toughness while in combat. Yes, that is as crazy as it seems. Any build that is resolve stacking now is absolutely absurd now. Just this one legendary aspect, you don't really have to worry about defensives that much past this. We are so incredibly tanky that tankiness is not a factor at any point now. It is almost purely down to damage. And also, with our resolve stacks giving us more damage and absurd survivability, you want resolve as your tempering on your helmet, on your chest piece, on your legs, and on your necklace. That's 12 max resolve stacks on each, because every single one of those pieces you want to temper on there and make sure to masterwork the temper and make sure to greater affix the temper through the tempering. And then when you're masterworking, you also want your greater affix to hit. So it's 12 max resolve stacks on those 4 different items for massive damage increase and to now make you basically immortal. But that is the entirety of this build. It's a very unique build, but also really cool. All you're doing is make sure you have max spirit, and then you're casting Cataclysm. You're keeping Stone Burst up at all times to proc effects and to give you increased armor and to just deal some more damage and apply other effects from our set bonus. And then you're just using all of your other skills. Cyclone Armor to pull everything in and to proc the legendary aspect we went over. Ravens to proc the earth effect of that legendary aspect for increased critical strike damage. Then you're using Debilitating Roar for just more survivability. And then you're throwing in Poison Creeper to proc some additional effects like our Spear regen and just multiple other effects. So an incredibly cool build, and I'm very surprised and happily surprised that this build can actually do all endgame content. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.